Hello there, good evening ladies and gentlemen, this is Al24 News, streaming live from the capital Algiers. And coming up next in our news program. Amid fears of a Russian attack, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said Germany stands close by Ukraine's side and Ukraine's territorial integrity is not negotiable. Canadian police tapped up that attempts to stop the Freedom Convoy protest blocking U.S. border route. Zionist soldiers have shot dead a 17-year-old Palestinian during confrontation near the town of Jenin. Teenage Russian figure skater Kamila Valieva has been cleared to compete in the women's figure skating competition at the Winter Olympics, despite failing a pre-games drug test. After an amazing opening over the Super Bowl game in California, LA Rams outsmarted the Cincinnati Bengals and won over 23-20. Hello again and welcome to Al24 World Latest. First in our top stories regarding rising escalation in Russian-Ukrainian tension, Kiev has requested an urgent meeting with Russia to discuss Moscow's massing of troops and military equipment near Ukraine. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz arrived in Kiev on Monday for crisis talks on concerns of an imminent Russian invasion. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky invited U.S. President Joe Biden to visit Ukraine soon when they spoke by a phone on Sunday. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz landed in Kiev today for crisis talks ahead of a visit to Moscow to head off what Berlin sees as the very critical threat of Russian invasion. His visit represents a continuation of de-escalation efforts of the crisis in Ukraine. Nabil Khazini has more to tell.
Another visit and another diplomatic attempt to ease tension in Ukraine. Like his antecedents, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz headed to Kiev at the time when the United States declared a war could kick off at any moment. But although the aim of his visit is not different, the outcome is hoped to offer the long-awaited breakthrough to the crisis.
There are no good reasons for the activities on the Ukrainian borders. Sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine is not negotiable. We expect Russia to take clear steps to resolve this situation.
Scholz's hope for a relief was shared from Moscow. President Putin discussed with Sergei Lavrov the efforts to get the United States and NATO to agree to withdrawing its troops from Eastern Europe and barring Ukraine from joining NATO. After the meeting, Lavrov said there was a chance for progress on the talks.
Today, many journalists and many leaders are hinting a little to Ukraine that it's possible not to take risks, not to constantly raise the issue of future membership in the alliance, because these risks are associated with the reaction of the Russian Federation. I believe that we should move along the path we have chosen.
European leaders warned that the crisis is the worst threat to the continent's security since the Cold War, while Kiev has demanded an urgent meeting with Russia to explain why it has deployed more than 100,000 troops to Ukraine's borders.
The visit by the German Chancellor is the latest in this wide few weeks of diplomacy that's made a little progress. It stepped up last month when the U.S. met his Russian counterpart in Geneva. Antony Blinken warned of a severe and united response if Russia invades. Last week, French President Emmanuel Macron became the most senior Western leader to hold face-to-face talks with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. They were unable to find a common ground. A day later, Emmanuel Macron was in Kiev with assurance for President Vladimir Zelensky that Putin would not escalate the crisis. On Thursday, negotiators from Ukraine, Russia, France and Germany met in Berlin in marathon 9-hour talks ended up without a breakthrough. Then on Saturday, the US president held a 1-hour phone call with Vladimir Putin, where Joe Biden warned of a severe cost for Russia, and the White House said there was no fundamental change. In the same line of thoughts, Russian military deployment to Belarus have raised concerns of the West over the possibility of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Many signals have been analyzed by American intelligence analysts came with the result of a possible invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces through its bordering neighbor Belarus. Usama Yadun, what follow?
Russia has continued to strengthen its military presence around Ukraine, with new deployments of troops and military equipment in multiple locations, including Crimea, Belarus, and near eastern Ukraine, furthering fears of an imminent invasion. Russia has been sending military forces into Belarus, its closest international ally, for weeks, insisting that the deployment was for joint military drills. The exercises began on Thursday and are expected to continue for 10 days. Western officials fear the drills are an excuse to build up forces that could then be used to invade Ukraine from the north. Russian fighter jets have launched air patrols, and Russia's potent S-400 air defense system was deployed near the Belarus-Ukrainian border.
So, will there be a war or not? Yes, there will be a war, but only in two cases. If Belarus suffers a direct aggression, if a hot war is unleashed against our Belarus. The second possibility when a war may happen and Belarus can take part in it. If our ally Russia suffers a direct attack, if such aggression is committed against the territory of the Russian Federation.
Fearing an invasion of Ukraine by Russia, many countries are urging their citizens there to leave and are cutting back their diplomatic staff. Moscow has said the drills are legal under international law, but Western officials worry that they are a cover to position even more Russian forces around Ukraine.
We want to be crystal clear on this point. Any American in Ukraine should leave as soon as possible, and in any event in the next 24 to 48 hours.
U.S. intelligence officials worry that weeks of crisis talks have given Russia the time to prepare for a major offensive, which will allow Putin to make the ultimate decision to attack Ukraine.
The intelligence community has sufficient confidence that I can stand before you today and say what I have said, which is that there is a distinct possibility that Vladimir Putin would order a military action, an invasion of Ukraine.
Joe Biden told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in a roughly hour-long call that the U.S. will respond swiftly and decisively if Russia takes further steps toward invasion. The call came amid U.S. warnings that a Russian invasion of Ukraine could happen as soon as the current week.
Some airlines have cancelled or diverted flights to Ukraine amid warnings from the West that an invasion by Russia is imminent, as Kiev says it will keep its airspace open. Russia denies its intention to invade Ukraine despite gathering tens of thousands of troops near the Ukrainian border and denouncing the West of peak hysteria. To a different matter now, teenage Russian figure skater Kamila Valieva has been cleared to compete in the women's figure skating competition at the Winter Olympics despite failing a pre-game drug test. The Court of Arbitration for the sport released its ruling less than 12 hours after a hastily arranged hearing that lasted into early Monday morning. The court said the 15-year-old, the favorite for the women's individual gold, doesn't need to be suspended ahead of a full investigation into her positive test.
The Court of Arbitration for Sport, actually the ad hoc division of the court, has issued its decision in the procedures relating to the figure skater Kamila Valieva. The CAS panel in charge of this matter has decided to let Ms. Valieva continue her participation in the Olympic Winter Games Beijing 2022. It means that no provisional suspension should be imposed on the skater.
The Algerian Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Program Tala Mamra received the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Honduras, Gerardo Torres Zelia, in his first international tour within the framework of traditional relations friendship and solidarity between Algeria and Honduras. A series of meetings with different Algerian authorities are on the program of the tour. The Vice Minister was received also by the authorities of the Democratic Sahrawi Arab Republic and the refugee camp in Tindouf a day before. Canadian police stepped up their attempts to stop the Freedom Convoy protest blocking U.S. border route. More than 50 police vehicles, including cruisers, buses, and an armored car, were deployed in the area, and the bridge was announced to reopen to traffic later on Sunday. Zafrojani has more to tell.
The Ambassador Bridge, the busiest border crossing between the United States and Canada, has reopened after police cleared anti-coronavirus protesters who had occupied the bridge for almost a week. Police in Windsor on the Canadian side of the border said earlier that more than 24 people were peacefully arrested, 7 vehicles were towed away and 5 seized near the bridge that links the city with Detroit.
The vehicle that's parked in here, we're asking you to move it.
Police stepped up their presence in the area on Sunday, deploying more than 50 vehicles, including cruisers, buses and an armored car, while the number of protesters dropped to about 45 from roughly 100 the previous day.
And we went down College to try to get to Huron Church, and I slowed the truck right down like 10 cars before them, and they came at us like they were ready to just take us down.
In a Canada-style protest convoy against COVID regulations, a convoy left Paris on Sunday morning and headed towards Brussels. On Saturday, the convoy had breached police defences and drove into central Paris, snarling traffic on the Champs-Élysées as police fired tear gas at demonstrators.
COVID and the story of the past is the empty and anti-freedom of our country. You realize that in Europe we have created freedom of movement and we are being checked by the CRS.
Canada's Freedom Convoy protests against COVID-19 mandates inspired several countries around Europe. Because of COVID, governments in Europe have placed restrictions on people's lives not seen outside of wartime.
New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said on Monday she felt demonstration against COVID-19 vaccine mandates now entering their second week were an imported phenomenon and nothing like anything she had seen before in the country. Hundreds of protesters continue to occupy lawns in the front of distinctive parliament for 7th day, ignoring repeated calls by the police to leave the undaunted by drenching rain over the weekend, claiming inspiration from Trackers' anti-vaccine mandate demonstration in Canada. Protesters have also blocked several streets around Parliament with their trucks, vans and motorcycles.
New Zealand is a place where protest is part of who we are. Some of our greatest movements have been born of people movements, many of which have entered the forecourts of Parliament. But what I'm seeing, it is some kind of imported form of protest. We've seen Trump flags, Canadian flags, people who are moving around the outskirts of the area with masks are being abused. Children and young people on their way to school are being abused. Businesses are seeing people occupy their spaces. But again, Corinne, my job here is very clear. We have a growing pandemic and that is what I'm focused on, and I'm going to let the police do their job.
Hong Kong's health facilities have been overloaded by an onslaught of COVID-19 infections as the rise in Omicron cases threatens to bring down the city's zero-COVID policy. Authorities have adhered to mainland China's policy of stamping out the smallest outbreak with mass quarantine, widespread tracking, and prolonged social distance measures since the start of the pandemic. Palestine now Zionist soldiers have shot dead 17-year-old Palestinian boy, according to a Palestinian health ministry, during this confrontation near the town of Jenin, hours after the police found out in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood trying to contain violence between ultra-nationalist Zionist activities, or rather activists, and Palestinian residents in the occupied West Bank. Still with the clashes between Palestinian residents and Zionist occupiers, which broke out in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood early on Sunday after Zionists lawmaker reopened his office in the neighborhood in this situation. Marab Al-Iwar has more to clarify.
At least 2 people were injured and 6 arrested in the flashpoint of El Quds neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in the pre-dawn hours of Sunday morning, after clashes were sparked by a statement issued leader of the far-right Zionism party announcing he will open a bureau in the flashpoint neighborhood. The latest outbreak of tensions between police and protesters and between Zionists and Palestinians took place in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, where clashes last year escalated into an 11-day war between the two sides. The neighborhood has long been explosively controversial, with Zionist nationalists attempting to evict Palestinians in a decades-long legal battle that helped touch off a war between Zionist entity and Hamas last year. Police attacked Palestinian demonstrators violently and evicted hundreds of Palestinians who were protesting against the opening of a bureau in the neighborhood as a symbol of resistance against the occupier. By Sunday evening, the Palestinian Quds News Network reported Zionist entity forces were using skunk water cannons to disperse Palestinian protesters in Sheikh Jarrah. 7 Palestinians facing eviction by settler groups have taken their cases to Zionist Supreme Court. Hamas, the Palestinian group that controls Gaza, warned there would be consequences over Zionists' repeated attacks on Sheikh Jarrah.
Thousands of Afghans have been evacuated from their homeland after Taliban took the country's rule. The Afghan refugees are seeking a better life in the United States. However, the challenge to cope with the American lifestyle and to get a whole new life for their families are on the top of their worries. Islam Seed has more to talk.
After the Taliban took control of the country, there were approximately 120,000 people from Afghanistan evacuated in August of 2021 after the U.S. Army withdrawal. Many of those evacuees ended up at U.S. military bases, for McCoy was nearing its maximum number of evacuees, of almost 13,000 people. Resettling in the United States for the evacuees is the first challenge among many along the road to establish their new lives. Numbers at the bases have decreased to fewer than 3,000 people. There are more waiting to be moved to their new homes. However, some of them decided to depend on themselves to move. Many Afghans used to have regular jobs in their homeland. Some of them were helped by their companies tied to the U.S. government to secure a spot for their families when the U.S. evacuated their allies in August. The most worry is about getting through the first months and the culture shock that will unavoidably come from living in a new society that has to get along with to cope with the American lifestyle.
In India, voters for local elections is underway in 3 Indian states, namely Uttarakhand, Goa and Uttar Pradesh. This is the second round polling in India's most populous region. The elections are seen as a key test for the popularity of India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the ruling BJP party. Authorities have made all the necessary facilities and security arrangements to ensure free and fair polling in the states. 4 Somali civilians were killed after the auto rickshaw ran over an unplanned explosive device planted by terrorists near Hans-Holy village in Al-Jawhal district of the Middle Shabelle region on Monday. The local police said that the dead bodies were all men who are camel traders. No group has claimed responsibility for the latest incident in Somalia, but Al-Shabaab militias usually stage such attacks in the country. According to officials, Sudanese authorities have arrested a former civilian member of the ruling Sovereignty Council, the latest in a sequence of arrests since the last year coup. Mohammed Al-Fakki Sulaiman was arrested by security forces while he was driving back home in Al-Khartoum on Sunday, an incident that threatens to undermine a fragile political tension to complete civilian government. Following the October coup, Fakki was dismissed from the position and held in detention before being freed. Protests in the capital Tunis carry on expressing their rejection against the presidential decree. Opposition parties has united against Kais Said's decision of reforming and changing the judicial system in the country. Islam Seed clarified.
Tens of thousands of Tunisians continue their protests after President Kais Saied replaced the country's judicial watchdog and gave him the power to fire judges and prevent them from striking. Mr. Said's instruction came a week after he declared the Supreme Judicial Council would be disbanded, prompting a nationwide court strike by judges who claimed the move jeopardized judicial independency.
Despite the indicators of national and international reports on the economic situation that alerted him to a danger threatening the country, the president, in my opinion, does not have any economic and social view to serve the people.
The decree, which establishes a new 21 member as a temporary Supreme Judicial Council, with 9 members chosen by the president, also gives him the power to fire any judge who fails to discharge his professional tasks.
It is forbidden for judges of all ranks to go on strike or hold any organized collective action that could disturb or delay the normal working of the courts.
Despite widespread domestic and international condemnation of Kais Said's decision to dissolve the Supreme Council of Judges, the Association of Tunisian Judges reiterated its total rejection of the establishment of the Provisional Supreme Council of Judiciary, outside the principles of legality and the Tunisian constitution.
We do not want the judiciary to be as it was in the era of Ben Ali. All people stand with the judges. I do not speak in the name of all people, but the free ones. The majority rejected his control over the judiciary. I want to tell him that people are suffering from the high cost of living, and even those who applauded the July 25 coup have retracted their support for you, and who still offer you an opportunity to retreat.
It's worth noting that Mr. Said dissolved the government, stopped parliament and seized a number of powers before declaring martial law, raising concerns about the country's democratic system.
The United Nations have said that 4 women activists in Afghanistan have been released by the country's de facto authorities after going missing weeks ago. Since storming back to power in August, the Taliban have cracked down on dissent by dispersing women's rallies using force, detaining critics, and often beating local journalists, covering up a sanctioned protest. The UN Secretary Special General's Advisor on Libya urged the temporary Prime Minister and his parliament designated successor to maintain stability and call for elections to be held as soon as possible. Sofian Kanturi.
The Prime Minister of National Recognized Administration of National Unity, Abdelhamid Dbeibah, has stated that he will only hand over power after an election, rejecting Parliament's decision last Thursday to appoint former Interior Minister Fathi Bashagha to lead the new government. Libya was supposed to hold presidential and parliamentary elections in December, but disagreement between factions and state entities over how they should be held resulted in process collapsing days before the poll. On Sunday, UN advisor Stephanie Williams met with Dbeibah and Bashagha separately. She said on Twitter,
I reiterated the importance for all actors and institutions to work within the political framework and above all to preserve calm on the ground in the interest of Libya's unity and stability.
Dbeibah emphasized the importance of completing Geneva Improved Map during his meeting with Williams, and he mentioned that all parties are responsible for creating the appropriate conditions for holding national elections and holding a referendum on the constitution during this year. Meanwhile, Libyan Prime Minister-designate Fathi Bashagha announced that he had begun consultations to form the next government, while Libyan National Unity Government spokesman Mohammed Hamouda confirmed that the government has legal legitimacy locally and internationally and will continue in office until the handover of power to an elected government.
Peru's government has declared a 45-day state of emergency in the capital of the Latin American country. As many Peruvians consider insecurity the most pressing issue, many people are afraid the government is not responding with a strong enough strategy to bring peace to the capital. Abel Khazini reports.
In Peru's capital, Lima, levels of insecurity have obliged the Peruvian authorities to declare a state of emergency in the city. This measure seeks to control and reduce crime levels during a period of time in which strict control over the population will be applied.
We will use the full force of the law. Our soldiers know what they need to do. We are armed forces and we go out with guns.
Security cameras around the Peruvian cities recorded different kinds of crimes, including armed robberies and young men stealing bags, as well as cell phones. An estimated of 4,000 cell phones are being stolen on a daily basis in Peru, while the National Institute of Statistics says more than a quarter of Lima's population has been victimized. All of these made people live their life in fear.
I don't go on the street after 5 p.m. I have been assaulted many times. They take your phone, and now if I have to go out, I don't have anything on my purse.
The pandemic of violence in Peru reached hospitals, where several health sector workers have been aggressed. Lately, citizen insecurity also pushed the president of Peru, Pedro Castillo, to declare another state of emergency in the district of José Leonardo Ortiz.
Switzerland votes to ban tobacco ads, which are easily visible to children and teenagers via the internet and street posters. Federal Chancellor figure showed that the yes camp winning 54%. Moreover, this tobacco banning in this report.
The Swiss voted overwhelmingly in a referendum on Sunday to ban tobacco advertising available to children and teenagers. Federal Chancellery figures showed that Yes Camp won 55% in addition to winning the support of the majority of the cantons, which are necessary conditions for the approval of the initiative.
Forbidding advertisement of tobacco does not mean taking people's freedom to smoke. We are not telling smokers not to smoke. We are rather telling them not to advertise toxic products that might affect negatively other people's health. And here there is a dilemma of freedom. Pseudo-freedom, I would call it.
Toxic? According to the preliminary results, the Swiss also by a majority of nearly 80% rejected the ban on experiments on animals and humans. These results actually show that public health considerations dominate the interest of the powerful tobacco production sector in the country. Swiss law currently prohibits tobacco advertising on radio and television or when it is directed specifically at minors.
And now for more international news and full updates, let's follow this summaries by Osama Yadi.
In Yemen, a Houthi telecommunication system which was used to control drones has been destroyed by the Saudi-led coalition. Residents told news agencies that the bombing targeted a ground station for satellites near the telecommunication ministry in the northern of the capital of Yemen, Sana'a. The coalition said the Iran-backed Houthis used ministry headquarters to launch hostile operations. According to officials, Sudanese authorities have arrested a former civilian member of the ruling Sovereign Council, the latest in a sequence of arrests since last year's coup. Mohammed Al-Fiqi Suleiman was arrested by security forces while he was driving back home in Khartoum on Sunday. A team from the International Atomic Energy Agency on Monday began its review of Japan's plan to begin releasing more than 1 million tons of treated radioactive water into the sea from the wrecked Fukushima nuclear plant, a review that Japan hopes will instill confidence in the plan. Ousted Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi went on trial on Monday on election fraud charges, the latest in a series of criminal prosecutions by the military-run government, in which she has already been sentenced to 6 years in prison. The appeals chamber of the International Criminal Court will hear on Ugandan former warlord Dominic Ongwen's case. The defense appeals against verdict and sentence. Dominic Ongwen was convicted in May 2021. He was a commander of the guerrilla group called Lord's Resistance Army. He was sentenced to 25 years of imprisonment for murder, rape, and sexual enslavement.
Our own reporter Osama Yadi will take us again for another international break, but this time within the economic sector.
U.S. consumer price inflation rose 0.6% in January and propelled annual inflation up to 7.5%, its highest rate since 1982. The rise in nearly every spending category was driven by increases in food and energy costs, as well as growing costs of cars and rents. The Office for National Statistics reported that the British economy grew by 7.5% in 2021, following a slam of nearly 10% the year before, when COVID-19 lockdowns and enduring restrictions disrupted economic activity. The record growth came in spite of a 0.2 contraction in December, as the economic variant of COVID-19 triggered tougher restrictions and kept consumers at home in the run-up to Christmas. Soaring diesel prices are straining governments as they seek to stave off inflation from rising energy costs and quell discontent from aggrieved truck operators that are seeking profit shrink. The diesel market in Asia has tightened significantly as reduced supplies from China coincided with production disruptions and surging demands in economies rebounding from the pandemic. According to data published by the country's central bank, Russia's gold and foreign currency holdings have reached $634.9 billion. Reserves have surged $800 million from the previous week, noting that the 0.1 rise was due to a positive market revaluation. The historical maximum of $639.6 billion was recorded last month.
After an amazing opening of the Super Bowl game in California, LA Rams outsmarted the Cincinnati Bengals and won over 23-20, allowing the fans not only to enjoy the game, but rather also to have halftime performances by worship famous artists. More in this report.
Los Angeles Rams won the Super Bowl game against the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday night for the first time in 20 years. The game was right there for the Cincinnati to close out. Then the Rams took over, and the flaws in a far-from-flawless Cincinnati roster were ultimately exposed. The Super Bowls are not only adored by fans for the actual game, but also for the artists and the show held by halftime. The iconic artists Snoop Dogg, Eminem, and Dr. Dre, as well as other famous artists, delivered a phenomenal show that hyped the crowd more than anything else.
Eminem visited the NBC Super Bowl production truck after the game, posed for photos with Al Chris and NBC SNF, among others, stayed for 20 minutes, I'm told. On subject of football and Eminem, you may remember his famous interview on ESPN during Michigan-Notre Dame game in 2013.
As a highlight, wide receiver Cooper Kupp was awarded the Super Bowl MVP after the amazing performance he held, while the Los Angeles Rams captured the championship title with a score of 23-20.
Peruvian archaeologists have discovered 14 pre-ancient mummies, or rather mummies, believed to be between 800 to 1,000 years old at the archaeological complex of Cajamarquilla, located east of the capital Lima. Archaeologists believe that children and adults were sacrificed in honor of a prominent figure within the local elite, whose mummy was found in late 2021 to keep him company in the afterlife.
As part of the funerary rites, other people were sacrificed in his honor. They were placed in the tomb's entrance so that they could accompany him in the path of the dead towards the final destination. Indian societies believed that after passing away, people didn't disappear. Death wasn't an ending, but a beginning, a transition to a parallel world.
2 new aircraft will be on a display at this year's Singapore Air Show, as well as the familiar faces from prior displays. The Hindustan Arkonastos, or rather Aeronautics Tigas light compact aircraft, is flying over Singapore for the first time.
Two new aircraft will be on display at this year's Singapore Air Show, as well as familiar faces from prior displays. The Hindustan Aeronautics Tejas light combat aircraft is flying over Singapore for the first time. The Tejas, which is powered by single GE Aviation F404, is making its way into the Indian Air Force in large numbers, following a prior purchase for 40 Mk1 examples. New Delhi approved 83 Mk1A examples in January 2021.
So we all know in this current environment, yes, the attendance it surely be lower. I think that's all of us will expect that. But as far as the quality is concerned, I'm not worried about that because here we have assembled a high quality set of exhibitors. More than 70% of the top 20 global aerospace companies are here.
The aircraft featured in the show is an Mk1 model. The Mk1A's replacement will have better avionics and armament. The Boeing 777-9 is another newcomer to the flying spectacle, with 31 examples on order. Singapore Airlines is projected to become Asia's largest operator of the type. Not to be outdone, Airbus is putting on static park demonstration flight with the A350,000, which was last seen at the show in 2018. The A350-900, the smaller model of A350, is a workhorse for Saya, with 58 in service and 1 on display in the static park. Saya purchased 7 A350FS to replace its 747-400 freighters in December 2021.
On Saturday, 12 February, Kenya held a cross race in tribute of Agnes Tirop, and the moment of silence was held while Vincent Tirop, the father of the late athlete, highlighted the numerous wins of his daughter.
Before Tirop's tragic death in October last year, Kenya was already preparing to host a World Athletics cross-country tour event in Eldoret. This year, Kenya held a cross-country race in tribute to late athlete Agnes Tirop. Many of Tirop's friends, rivals, and former teammates were in Eldoret this weekend. Joyce Chepkemwatele won the 10-kilometer senior women race, and she remembered fellow athlete Agnes Tirop as she received her medal.
We ran today's race to commemorate Tirop, and she was a good person and loved everybody without discriminating.
Agnes Tirop was two-time world 10-kilometer bronze medalist, and just a month before her husband murdered her, Tirop set a women-only world record. Her father said that if she is still with them, she would have been more successful, and they would have expected her to receive more trophies. It is worth mentioning to notice that World Athletics and Athletics Kenya said Tirop's memorial race will be held annually.
To this point, ladies and gentlemen, let's check again our top stories. Amid fears of a Russian attack, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said Germany stands close by Ukraine's side and Ukraine's territorial integrity is not negotiable. Canadian police stepped up the attempts to stop the Freedom Convoy protests blocking U.S. border route. Zionist soldiers have shot a dead 17-year-old Palestinian during confrontation near the town of Jenin. Teenage Russian figure skater Kamila Valieva has been cleared to compete in the women's figure skating competition at the Winter Olympics despite failing a pre-games drug test. After an amazing opening of the Super Bowl game in California, LA Rams outsmarted the Cincinnati Bengals and won over 23-20. And that's all the news we have grasped for today's bulletin. Thank you so much for being with us. Have a blessed evening. See you. Bye-bye.